All right, please welcome to the stage the newly minted medallion wearing, well, not right now, Scott Berger.
All right, thank you, everybody. Thank you for showing up here right after lunch. Hopefully everybody's awake because we're going to be talking about stuff like REST parameters and debug logging and all that sort of fun, exciting stuff, the kind of stuff I love. So if that is what you are looking for, you are in the right place. We're going to be talking about accessing ServiceNow data with Cribl Stream. We've got a few people still filtering in, but we'll kind of kick off quick introductions here. So I'm Scott Berger. I'm lead security data engineer at ServiceNow. I work as part of the security data platform engineering team, which is well represented here in the first row. At ServiceNow, we manage basically our logging systems. Cribl is part of that. It is a big part of that. We manage the systems that collect the data. We manage Cribl to deliver it. We manage the systems that accept it, provide it to our users. That's multiple systems. We have, the single big central system that shall not be named where we keep most of our stuff, but we also ship it off to a great many other systems. And part of, what we're going to be talking about today is the ability to do so, and that Cribl's brought to us. But our team is responsible for the platform in terms of making sure that it is up and running, that data is being collected, that we're getting the data that we expect, that it is being delivered to the right place in the right format, and that users are able to access it in a performant way. And about a few years ago, that's where Cribl kind of came in and really changed the way that we work. So quick disclaimer before we start. I am a ServiceNow employee. We are a Cribl customer. We use Cribl extensively for accessing our ServiceNow data through the REST API. But this is a talk about the lessons that we've learned, about the things that we do, kind of tips and tricks. This is not any sort of warranty or guarantee of that this will work in your environment or work exactly the same. I'm not making any promises on behalf of ServiceNow here, just to make sure that you understand this is kind of a one hands-on administrator to another, kind of conveying lessons learned. Just make sure that everybody kind of level sets there. But the agenda for today, we're going to talk about Cribl at ServiceNow, what brought us into Cribl, where it took us over the last couple of years, what brought us to starting to work with the ServiceNow Table API, which is where we're getting a lot of this data from. Talking about that, and then kind of best practices for connecting, how do you get access to that data, and then tips, tricks, and troubleshooting. And of course, a lot of this is specific to the ServiceNow Table API, but it's a REST collector in the end. It's these kind of lessons are going to apply to a lot of other systems that are going to be function similarly. And of course, the use cases are going to be the same regardless of where you have the data coming from. But so, kind of the story of Cribl at ServiceNow. For a long time, we were a Splunk-only shop. We were kind of in that ecosystem of Splunk Universal Forwarder, delivering data into Splunk. What originally brought us to it was the very classic use case for Cribl, which is, hey, we are getting a lot more data than we can handle in terms of growth. We need to do some reduction. Of course, Splunk has ability to filter things, but we needed much more advanced filtering, something that Cribl brings to us. So we started in with a project that said, hey, we're going to be able to reduce the data we have coming in by this amount, and that will make a Cribl purchase cost neutral. And that got us the approval. We brought it in. We actually, exceeded our targets. Cribl beat our expectations, and we were able to reduce more. So it's, we got more functionality and actually, saved money, which was great. But that was brought in for that kind of singular use case of reduction. Once we got it in there, we found there's a lot more stuff that we can do with this. And one of the first things we ran into was, let's consolidate a lot of our collection into Cribl. We have a team that's been here for about 10 years, and as you can imagine, there was a lot of kind of things that have built up over time, scripts that people had written, tools that we had acquired along the way, Splunk TAs and other things that we were using to collect data, scripts that vendors gave us. And so we said, let's bring all this stuff into a single central place, because right now, it's tough to maintain it, especially when you're talking about things like Python scripts and stuff like that. They were written by, one guy with a certain philosophy a long time ago, and, he's not on the team anymore. And, it's terrifying to go and touch it because every time you do, it breaks, and then it stops all collections. So let's kind of get that into a place. in which we not only have it in a single place, but in a place that everybody can access, that it's very easy to get to. When you're talking about a REST collector in Cribl and you want to duplicate it, well, you just clone it. Give it a new name, update the table, update the fields, hit save, commit and deploy, and you're done. Anybody can do that. We don't have to go out and find people who are Python experts. We don't have to go and mess around with scripts every time. That brought everything into a single system. And of course, it's Cribl. Previously, all the scripts and everything else we had was targeted from collect data from this system and put it in this one specific system. That doesn't scale. That's hard to move to other places. Cribl, collect it in Cribl and send it anywhere and everywhere that you want. You also have kind of versioning and rollback and a lot of the other benefits that Cribl gives you. But once we got that in there, that kind of opened up this idea that we could scale this stuff up. This wasn't like a hard thing to do anymore to bring in new REST inputs. We could, like I said, we could duplicate them very easily. And so that has been the story of kind of growth at Cribl, growth of Cribl at ServiceNow since then, is that new teams coming to us with new ideas and new use cases and saying, hey, we heard you have Cribl, can it do this, can it do that? One of the big things that people started coming to us with was, we need to get data out of our CMDB in particular, but other things, incident cases and stuff like that. Data that we have locked away in ServiceNow, that of course ServiceNow platform is wonderful for doing analysis and work with that. That's what our product is. But then we want to have that in other places. In some cases, that's things like SIEMs and other logging systems where you want to do search time, enrichment. Where you want to have lists of users and systems, so you can do alert management and escalation, things like that. We had a lot of teams come to us that they wanted to get data from our ServiceNow, things like incidents, tickets, vulnerability notifications, problems, cases, all that other stuff, into other systems where they could do kind of deeper analysis. Now again, ServiceNow does that analysis natively in platform, but when you have data coming in from other tools as well. And you have, users who don't really, they want to see this in one single place. You can bring it into other places like, Snowflake or things like that and be able to do that analysis in other places. That gets you the ability to do basically enterprise OKR dashboards is one of the things that we're doing, OKR dashboards and metrics. That's been a big win for us because basically we have all of our programs have instituted, here's the metrics that show success, here's the metrics that show our performance. We have that data that they can go in and build dashboards for. So when they do executive presentations and talk to their directors, they can basically look at these dashboards and say, here they are. And a lot of that's based on, basically incidents. How many incidents were open last month? How many were closed? What was the SLA? How long did they take? Vulnerability metrics. How many vulnerabilities have we identified? Things like that. That not only gives you kind of that, ability to do the dashboarding and reporting in other places, but you also get the ability to do automations. You have all this data out there. Let's, do meta-analysis of some of these things and create, incidents based on the incidents. Let's roll them up together. Let's do things like, if we've got a certificate expiring, and that's going through our system, hey, let's, check to see if there's already an incident or a change open for that system. And then, if there is, we don't have to, create a new system or a new, incident for it. It also gives you historical reporting and trending, and you can do snapshots in time. That's big because ServiceNow is basically it's a database, and so whatever it is today is what it is today. It's what it was last month on September 1st or August 1st. Sometimes you want to know exactly that, so you have a nice metric of how many were open each month, how many were closed each month. Getting it out of a static database and into a snapshot is a very nice way of being able, enabling that functionality. So, what kind of data are we talking about? And this is kind of lesson learned number one. CMDB data, when you're doing enrichment, one of the big things is when you're going to do enrichment of something, don't use your CMDB to enrich something you already have. You have a lot of data in your CMDB. Sometimes that's data that's obvious on the system, like what is the IP address? Use the IP address you get from the system. Don't go and trust your CMDB because here's the reality. CMDBs are not always perfect. I think everybody knows that one. So don't rely upon an external static source. If you can get it from the system, like, driving the host, the data center from the host name or the application name from the host name or something like that, do that. Use the live data first. Make sure that you use the data you have in front of you. But a lot of times when you're talking about enriching with CMDB data, you're talking about bringing in metadata that you can't possibly get from the system. What is the assignment group that manages this server? Who's their manager for escalations? Are there any open changes or incidents or requests for this system that might affect the way that you respond to some metric or event? What location is this in? What applications does it serve? What customers does it go to? Things like that. So this is data that you can bring out of your ServiceNow instance that you have about all these systems, bring it into other places to do enrichment, in the platform of your choice. So that is kind of the background of, why we did this and what we did, some of the things that we had use cases around. And so how do you get connected? When you're talking about connecting to ServiceNow, you're probably talking about the ServiceNow Table API. Now, if you go out to our public documentation, we'll say real quickly that one of the things I appreciate about ServiceNow, I appreciate this about any company that does it, is that our documentation is freely available from the ServiceNow site. After a couple of clicks, you don't have to log in, you don't have to sign up for a support account, you don't have to talk to your salesperson or download a white paper. It's just right there. And everything that we're going to be talking about is in this documentation. So I encourage you to just search for the Table API, and that will bring you right to it. The other thing is, this is 25, and the ServiceNow Table API and the REST interface to it is very well understood by AI. So if you talk to any of the LLMs and ask them how to do this, they are well versed in it. So if you're going to be connecting to, though, if you go out to look at our API references, there's a lot of APIs. There's dozens and dozens of them. But if you've been in, if you've used ServiceNow, you've probably looked at it and said, hey, I'm looking at this table, and this kind of looks like, a thinly veiled web front end for a SQL table. And, that's exactly what it is. You're very perceptive. It is a thinly veiled web front end for a SQL table. And so when you're talking to that, it's, as you would expect, it is the Table API to talk to SQL tables. So that is the one that you're going to be using. But before you start using it, definitely talk to your ServiceNow admin. When you start using it, number one, they may have things that they'll expect you to do. A lot of the larger instances have things like dedicated API gateways, so that instead of connecting to the same web front end that the users do, you're connecting to API workers. Sometimes they'll have specific parameters that have been added to redirect you over to a read-only copy, so that it improves performance instead of hitting the live database, things like that. The other thing is just give them a heads up, because especially if you're going to be doing bulk data copies, they're going to notice. They're going to pop open their administration, and you are going to be right at the top, and you don't really want to start your relationship with them by them coming to you going, oh my God, what are you doing to my database? So make sure that you talk to them. They can help you out with not just any pointers in terms of getting connected and any parameters that you should be using, but also assistance with performance expectations, as well as styling filters and whatnot to make sure that you're collecting exactly the data that you want. But so how do you get connected? So within Cribl, this is just going to be a new REST collector source. So within there, hit a new, and it's a very easy one to configure, very basic. It's just a GET request, and we'll say real quickly. This is the same Table API if you want to create incidents or create changes or anything else. If you want to insert, it's just a post instead of a GET. And of course, it's all in the documentation. But mostly going to be focusing on getting data out in this. But it is the same API. So basically, with Connect, it's going to be your basic instance name.servicenow.com or whatever your company specific URL is. Then API now table, and then the name of the table. The name of the table is going to be what you're seeing in the UI if you're going in there and looking at it. But within the UI, basically, it will have _list.do appended to the end. So if you were looking at the sysuser table, it would be sys_user_list.do. That's just basically the UIism that displays it within the web page. So strip that off, because that's a very common mistake when people ask you, hey, pull data out of this table. They give you the whole URL. And if you try to request that _list, it comes back with a 400 bad request. So, take that off of there. That gives you the name of the table. When you do configure it, the data is going to come back as a JSON array. So super easy to work with, just set a JSON array. But, kind of big lesson learned number 2 here, I think it's number 2, is timestamps. just about any record you get back from ServiceNow is going to have timestamps all over it. There's going to be a sys created on, a sys updated on. There's probably going to be things like opened at, closed at, updated at, things like that. And you do not want your system of choice just picking one. So either be sure that you find the one that you specifically want and configure that within the event breaker, or just set it to current time, which if you're doing lookups, you're going to want it that way. Because otherwise, if you just let it go and you export this out to a time series database, it's going to spray it all over the calendar, because there'll be things like sys created on for systems that were built 8 years ago, things like that. When you're setting up the collector, there's kind of a few critical parameters here, and it's basically these four. Sysparm fields, again, web front end for a SQL database. What happens when you actually make these requests is it takes the request that you send it in the API, sends it to an API gateway. That API gateway turns it into a SQL query. And then it sends it off to the database, returns the data, sends it back to you. The table name is the select from, and then your sysparm fields. And again, like sysparm underscore is a ServiceNowism. All the fields are prefixed with sysparm underscore. But fields is going to be your table header rows. So select these fields from this table. If you do not specify that, it selects everything. Maybe you want that, maybe you don't. You probably don't. That's kind of lesson learned number 3, is that especially if you're grabbing things like incidents or changes, people will paste in massive, hey, here's the results of our, inventory prior to run or something like that. That may be a megabyte of just stuff you don't care about. It's going to be a field in the database, and it will be coming back if you don't specify which fields you want. And, like I said, make sure that you pay attention to that. Query. The sysparm query is basically, it's the filter. So that is going to be your where clause in the SQL query. I'll talk about this in one of the tips and tricks slides, but basically that is, it is a unique language for the ServiceNow API. But the easy way to do it is basically build it in the UI, and then it's right there in the URL. Copy that into your REST collection job. And then the final one, there's one called sysparm display value. This is kind of another lessons learned there, is that the ServiceNow tables can have references. So like if you have a user, you don't want to put the user in every single table, basic database stuff. You have it as a reference to another table, your sysuser table. When by default, that is going to come back as the ID of the row in the other table. So every ServiceNow table has a sys ID, which is a UUID that is unique to that row. And that's an important thing, because you're going to use that in a lot of places for deduplication, sorting, things like that. But by default, the API will return the UUID rather than what you're looking for, which is like the name. Set sysparm display value to true. Pagination, we're going to talk about that a bunch in tips and tricks. We support a bunch of methods. I'll give you the recommended one here in a little bit. So tips, tricks, techniques. Big one is sysparm limit. And this really applies when you're doing pagination and bulk export of data, which is a lot of times if you're pulling out all of your Linux servers, that's going to be exactly that. If you're pulling out all of your Windows servers for augmentation or enhancement in your platform, or you're pulling out all your incidents for reporting, things like that, you're going to be paging through them. The limit is critical, because what's going to happen is if that's too low, it's going to take forever. If it's too high, it's not going to work, and it's going to silently fail on you. So what happens is when you kick off these database jobs, I'll talk about this a little bit more too. Basically, they have a timeout, and if it times out, you're only going to get the records they were able to get in that time. And the larger the table, the longer the query takes. So as the tables get larger, you want to kind of adjust that downward. Real short answer is somewhere between 2,000 and 5,000. And I'll talk about where you can look in the logs to kind of tune that as you go. So as the things grow, they're going to get, you want to tune it down, you want to pay more attention to it. So the query language, in terms of filtering, it is definitely unique. It is documented in the API, and like I said, AI engines tend to know it pretty well. But especially if you're getting into complicated ones, the easiest thing to do, and this is just one of those great lessons learned, is that go into the UI, and you can kind of, in terms of getting the table name from the UI, you can also kind of go backwards if you just want to go look at the table in the UI, just instance name, /table name _ list.do, and it'll pop right up. You're going to get a lot of good stuff from there because right at the, at the top, it'll be telling you, hey, we're showing you 20 out of 48,000 rows. That's, the size of your table, things like that. But it also gives you the ability to build the filter right there in the UI. Use the graphical one. Make sure that you're getting the number of rows that you expect. If you're expecting, 5,000 rows back, that you're getting that. Make sure that the rows look correct and everything like that. You have your filter built that works. It's going to be right there in the URL. There's going to be, the URL is going to have sysparm query equals. Copy the URL, paste it into a URL decoder, and then just copy that out and put it into your sysparm query field within Cribl. So one of the things with pagination is that it requires that you order the rows before you do pagination. And so you must always include an order by clause as part of the filter. Because otherwise what's going to happen, I see people laughing down here, basically what's going to happen is it's going to pick 1,000 rows at random and just return them to you. You need to have it as an order by in there so that it basically puts it in the same order every time and then pages through the jobs as you go. And one of the things to be aware of, and this is a big lessons learned, is that when you do pagination with the ServiceNow API, those are independent queries. So it is not a thing where it makes a cached copy or takes a snapshot in time when you run your first search or your first query, and then you page through that. It is instead you are doing a select star from this table, order by sys ID, and then take rows 1,000 through 2,000, 2,000 through 3,000. So one thing to be aware of is that if this is a heavily used table, things are going to happen in between those queries. The table is not going to be the same from beginning to end. So that is a difficult lesson learned, but if you're looking to get a perfect snapshot of a table, if it's changing, you're never going to get it. You're going to need to be able to live with, hey, we're off by a few records here or a few records there. Don't get bogged down in making sure that you have exactly 2,638,253 rows. Understand that the table is constantly evolving, that it may change in between queries as you page through it, and be prepared to kind of explain that to anybody who's going back to check your work later. Hey, I'm looking in the UI and it says there's supposed to be 2,338 rows and I only see 2,335. What's going on? You'll get that question a lot, and that's usually the reason. One of the other interesting things here, and as long as you're in there building the filter, is that the table names you see in the UI, or the header names, are not the actual names of the columns in the database. Sometimes they are, a lot of times they're not. So if you're looking at something up there like number, in the actual database, it may be u_number. And when you're using the API, if you put in number as the field you want back, if it's actually u_number in the table, the field's just not going to be there in the results. It's not giving you anything back because it doesn't know what that is. So definite lesson learned there is that when you're building these and testing these, make sure that you look at the JSON, make sure that hey, we're expecting these 10 fields, inventory them one by one. Hey, you're expecting these fields, they're actually there. If they're not, go figure out why. There's a lot of reasons. I'll talk about a couple more here on the permissions slide. But in a lot of cases, it's because the name of the table header or the name of the column is different than what's in the ServiceNow UI. And the quickest, easiest way to do that is build your filter. So now you have that. And then you'll have some rows there. Click on one of the columns, and there'll be a download menu. Export it to CSV. The header row of the CSV is going to be your field names. Just paste that right into Cribl, and you're good to go. So that is a not only easy way to find them, but it's a quick time saver too. You don't have to go type all that stuff out. So permissions. This is one that, again, kind of a hard-fought lesson that we learned over time. You're going to be using a service account for access, most likely. You'll get that from your system administrator when you talk to them about getting this set up. The service account will need to have permissions to the tables. If they don't have permissions to the tables, you may get one of two things. Basically, depending on the role and depending on how they have things set up, if you don't have permission to the table at all, you're going to get a 401 forbidden. And that's going to be very obvious. You can go and request the access. But the other thing that you might get is that if you have access to the table but none of the rows, because there are row-level ACLs, you may get a 200 OK and an empty array, no data back, or maybe a subset of the rows that you were expecting. So you need to, again, big lesson learned there, validate how many rows you were expecting versus how many rows that you got. If you're expecting 41,000 and you get 35,000, chances are that there are row-level ACLs and you need to be added to some more roles to get you, access into every row in the table. One of the things that the API does is that every time you run a query against it, it also runs a select count from the table. And it returns that in the header. I'll have a slide on that real quick. Basically as X total count that you can use for pagination, but that also gives you the number of rows in the table. And so you can use that real quickly to compare. The only kind of caveat there is that select count bypasses row-level ACLs. So in the cases that you want to only get the rows that you have access to, you're not going to be able to use that field very well for counting because you may not have access to all the rows that it is able to count. I mentioned before that there are reference tables where you're basically referencing one field in the table to another one. That one there is that you have to have access to the tables underneath. So every table that it is referenced to, you must have permissions to read from that table and to read that row in that table. What you'll see if you don't is just an empty string. So you get double quotes and whatever tool you're using to kind of preview these. Again, that's kind of the lesson learned is that get in there and validate the data that you're expecting, validate that everything is coming back. If you're seeing every single time that there's one field that is coming back as an empty string, chances are that is a reference to another table and you don't have permissions to it. And so yeah, like I mentioned, there are row and column level ACLs. So that is not only kind of a lesson to validate your data, but also that's the first place to go looking if you're not getting what you expect. And your ServiceNow admin will be able to very quickly troubleshoot that. So Cribl side, one of the things that you definitely want to do is turn on debug logging. So by default, Cribl does not log the full URL, and that makes sense because you may have sensitive parameters in the URL. You don't want to spray those into your logs. With the ServiceNow API, unless you're doing something really weird, your parameters are not going to be sensitive, and you really want that full URL because that is going to give you not only what exactly was sent to the table, it'll give you the last offset if you need to resume the job, so that's really nice to work with. It also, if you're using earliest and latest or things like that, you get the actual timestamp of what was sent, and that's if you're trying to troubleshoot why a job didn't return rows. That's one right there because I've been doing this for a few years with the ServiceNow API, and I still cannot wrap my head around timestamp or time zone conversions. Because you have this kind of thing where you're starting from whatever local time zone you're in, but the scheduler runs in UTC, and you're talking to ServiceNow, which is going to be a Unix timestamp in the database, but that's going to get localized when it comes back if it's in the UI. But if it's the API, I don't think it gets localized. But ServiceNow servers run in Pacific time, so you're going to have an offset. Forget it. Just go in there, turn on debugging, look what the earliest was, and then look what the first row you came back with, and adjust from there. Sometimes you'll be, if you happen to be in the Pacific time, you're probably fine with local. If you're in UTC, you're going to be offset from there. Yeah, just look at your logs, look at the results, go from there. The other thing is that when you turn on debug logging, you'll get max offset, which is the number of rows in the table. That's hugely important because that'll give you the ability to tell, hey, I'm expecting this many rows, we've gotten this many rows. That'll be in the task log, which I'll show in just another slide here. One thing you see there is a lot of times when you're working on these, you're going to be jumping back and forth in terms of developing, probably do an external tool just for a little bit of easier kind of ability to work through these things, like looking in Postman to get some of the header information. Go to the REST API talk this afternoon that Glenn is giving. I think it's at 4:30. 4:30, 4:45. There's going to be some kind of previews of some more in Cribl tool usage that will help with some of this, as well as some good information on packs and a lot of other things. So definitely go to that. One thing in terms of the logging, basically this is what the debug logs are going to look like. If your eyes are as bad as mine, you probably can't read that from where you are, but the 3 rows, 2 up from the bottom, basically there it is. Sysparm limit equals 1,000, discovered events equals 1,000, collected events equals 1,000. Right there, that is probably the biggest lesson learned, is that watch your logs, make sure that you're getting back the number of rows that you're expecting, make sure that you're getting back the fields you're expecting, validate your data, and then adjust your parameters from there if you're getting more or less than you're expecting. Talk to your ServiceNow admin if you're getting permissions problems. And then if you're getting your ServiceNow logs, and one thing is that this table API is where you can get your logs. If you're using like the Splunk TA to get them right now, you can replace it with this. That's actually how I learned the ServiceNow API, was looking at the Splunk logs and the URLs that it was in there. And that was one of the first things that we moved over. But you can jump into your ServiceNow logs, search for like your query and your username. That will give you a TX ID that will allow you to trace it all the way back through to the database transaction. And if you're getting things like database transaction terminated at 60 seconds, well, there's your problem. Adjust your limits from there, and that should solve the issue. So with exactly 0 left on the clock, thank you everybody for coming to this. Hopefully you got some good information out of it. Hopefully it wasn't too dry, but I wanted to kind of convey some of the hard lessons learned that we found building this stuff within ServiceNow. And I don't think we'll have time for questions, but I will be here the rest of the next 2 days. Stop me in the hallway, ask me anything. I'd love to sit down and talk about all this stuff. I could have made this presentation 3 hours long. There's a lot more that we could cover. So thank you, everybody. Have a great KubeCon.